I thought this was purely about the shooting. We saw the video. It's like we see the video of K Flock walking by. They kind of identified him by his expensive jeans.
Kay Flock sat in that federal courtroom, watching surveillance footage play on the screen, a footage that would determine whether he'd spend the rest of his life behind bars. What prosecutors revealed next left the Bronx drill rapper on the floor, but it was the jury's unexpected verdict that nobody saw coming. From Billboard's Rookie of the Month to federal racketeering. Before we can talk about where Kay Flock is now, we need to understand where he came from, because this isn't just a story about crime and punishment. It's a story about how quickly things can change in this industry, and how the same streets that elevate you can become the very thing that destroys everything you've worked for.
All right, the K Flock trial started. Shout out to everybody that's tweeting me, yo, the trial began. Most of us know he's a Bronx drill rapper, right? The original indictment, though, K Flock indicted on federal racketeering and murder charges.
Kevin Perez was born on April 20th, 2003, right in the heart of the Bronx, New York City. Growing up half Dominican and half Puerto Rican in what he himself would later describe as a dangerous neighborhood, young Kevin was shaped by his environment from the very beginning. The Bronx has always been fertile ground for hip-hop, but by the time Kevin started making music in 2020 under the name K Flock, a new sound had taken over the borough: drill. Bronx drill was different from its Chicago predecessor. It was faster, more chaotic, and undeniably more connected to the immediate streets its artists came from. In K Flock, he embodied every single element of that sound. His delivery was aggressive, his flow was relentless, and his subject matter pulled directly from the world around him. When he dropped his first single, FTO, in May 2020, people immediately took notice. The songs that followed, Op Spotter with B Lovey, Brotherly Love featuring B Lovey and Dougie B, PSA, each one seemed to generate more buzz than the last. And then came November 2021, when K Flock released his debut mixtape, the DOA tape. That project peaked at #1 on the Billboard Heat Seekers charts. In the same month, Billboard named K Flock their hip-hop Rookie of the Month. Think about that for a second. At just 18 years old, this kid from the Bronx had labels paying attention, industry heavyweights reaching out, and a growing fan base that hung on his every word. He appeared on Lil Che's Not in the Mood alongside Fivio Foreign, a track that would go on to peak at number 61 on the Billboard Hot 100. During interviews with XXL, his style was being compared to King Von and Pop Smoke. Asian Doll herself said that Von would have been a fan of K Flock's music. Everything was moving in the right direction. K Flock seemed destined for stardom. His music was connecting, his collaborations were getting bigger, and the streets were behind him completely. And then, December 16, 2021, happened. On that cold Thursday morning, right around 9:53 a.m., something transpired outside a barbershop on Amsterdam Avenue near West 151st Street in Harlem's Hamilton Heights neighborhood, something that would change the trajectory of K Flock's life forever. According to reports from multiple sources, a 24-year-old man named Oscar Hernandez, also known as Huascar Hernandez, was sitting inside a barbershop waiting to get a haircut when K Flock walked by. What happened next has been the subject of intense debate ever since. The initial police narrative stated that K Flock opened the shop's door and asked Hernandez what he was looking at. Hernandez then stepped outside to confront him. The two argued briefly before K Flock began to walk away, but then, according to authorities, the 18-year-old turned around, pulled out a 9mm firearm, and shot Hernandez in the neck and back. Hernandez was rushed to Matt Sinai Morningside Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. The NYPD released a wanted poster describing K Flock as armed and dangerous, noting his previous gun charges and identifying him as a known Third Side gang member. Police believe the shooting was gang-related, with Hernandez allegedly being a member of the Bronx-based Third Side Gang, a group that had reportedly been engaged in ongoing conflicts with rival factions. However, Hernandez's family immediately pushed back against this narrative. They maintained that their loved one's death was a case of mistaken identity, that Hernandez and K Flock did not know each other, and that there was no pre-existing beef between them. 1 week after the shooting, on December 23, 2021, K Flock walked into the 30th precinct and surrendered himself to authorities. His attorney, Scott Lehman, immediately released a statement challenging the police version of events. The surveillance footage from the barbershop's exterior camera would become central to the defense's argument. According to some reports, that footage allegedly showed Hernandez coming outside to follow K Flock unprompted, not the other way around as police initially suggested. Lehman's team began conducting their own investigation, demanding prompt disclosure of all videos referenced in the complaint. K Flock was charged with murder and criminal possession of a weapon. Just weeks earlier, he had been Billboard's Rookie of the Month. Now he was facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life behind bars. For over a year, K Flock sat in custody at Rikers Island, awaiting trial on state murder charges. During this time, he managed to maintain some semblance of his career, most notably through his feature on Shake It with Dougie B, Cardi B, and Bori 300 in April 2022, which peaked at number 51 on the Billboard Hot 100. But while his music continued to reach audiences, his legal situation was about to get exponentially worse. On February 23, 2023, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York unsealed an indictment that changed everything. Kay Flock, along with 7 other alleged gang members, was now facing federal racketeering charges under the RICO Act. U.S. Attorney Damian Williams stated in the Department of Justice press release, "Over a span of several years, the members of these gangs allegedly terrorized neighborhoods in the Bronx and Manhattan by killing and shooting other people. Through these charges, we will hold Sev Side and Third Side members responsible for plaguing our communities with gun violence." The federal indictment accused Kay Flock of being a leader within Sev Side, also known as DOA, which stands for Dead on Arrival, a street gang based in the Belmont neighborhood of the Bronx. According to prosecutors, the gang's primary activities included robberies, acts of violence, and financial fraud. The indictment alleged that Kay Flock and his associates had engaged in wire fraud, bank fraud, check and unemployment fraud schemes, and multiple shootings between 2020 and 2022. The Hernandez murder was now a federal case, but it was no longer the only shooting Kay Flock was facing charges for. The indictment connected him to at least 7 different shooting incidents in the Bronx during that 2-year span. This wasn't just about one confrontation outside a barbershop anymore. This was RICO. This was the federal government coming at Kay Flock with everything they had, and at one point, prosecutors were considering seeking the death penalty. Rap lyrics, Instagram posts, and the weight of evidence. Before we get into what happened during the trial itself, we need to understand something crucial about RICO cases, because if you don't understand how RICO works, you won't fully appreciate just how dangerous Kay Flock's situation truly was. RICO, the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, was originally designed to take down organized crime families like the Mafia. The genius of RICO, from law enforcement's perspective, is that it allows prosecutors to connect individuals to a pattern of criminal activity. If they can prove you're part of an enterprise that commits crimes, they can hold you responsible for the actions of the entire organization, not just your own individual actions.
They're using to continue to compound and create the allegations that this isn't just individual. And the reason why, obviously, this goes all the way back to the Mafia days and John Gotti, why for law enforcement and the government, RICO was so important. Because if I can just tie these people together, I got them. That's all I need to do.
And in Kay Flock's case, the government was using something that didn't exist in John Gotti's era, social media. According to court documents, the prosecution submitted letters to the judge seeking admission of 3 Instagram videos containing clips of Kay Flock's rap music. Their argument was straightforward but chilling. Because Kay Flock posted these clips publicly on his own Instagram account, that content was pertinent information regarding the racketeering enterprise charged in the indictment. The prosecution went even further. They claimed that Kay Flock used his Instagram account to recruit co-conspirators for fraud schemes. Their theory was that by posting excerpts of his music, he raised the profile of his account, attracted more followers, and in turn, gained access to a greater number of potential recruits for criminal activity. One specific example from the court filings involved a 35-second selfie-style video clip where Kay Flock was depicted rapping along to his own music. The caption included lyrics that referenced Sev Side DOA not being friendly with rival gang Old Wise, and suggested that Sev Side members would bring their guns, referred to as chops, to shoot at their opponents. The government argued that the Old Wise gang was based out of the Sugar Hill neighborhood of Upper Manhattan, the exact neighborhood where the Hernandez shooting took place on December 16, 2021. The pattern was clear. Prosecutors were treating Kay Flock's music and social media presence not as artistic expression, but as evidence of criminal intent and gang activity. Every hashtag, every caption, every lyric was being dissected and presented to the jury as proof of his involvement in a violent criminal enterprise. Kay Flock's federal trial began on March 10, 2025, more than 3 years after he first surrendered to authorities following the Hernandez shooting. He was the only defendant from the original indictment who had not entered into a plea agreement with the government. Everyone else had taken deals. Kay Flock chose to fight. The trial attracted significant attention, not just because of Kay Flock's celebrity, but because of the controversial strategy prosecutors employed. His music video, Who Really Bugging, was introduced as evidence, with prosecutors arguing it explicitly detailed his involvement involvement in violent acts and referenced specific shooting incidents. The defense, led by attorney Jeffrey Lichtman, vigorously contested the charges. From the very beginning, Lichtman's argument was clear. This case wasn't really about Kevin Perez the person. It was about K-Flock the rapper. It was, in his words, US versus drill rap. The defense maintained that the December 2021 shooting was purely an act of self-defense. According to Lichtman, surveillance footage backed up their assertion that Hernandez had approached K-Flock, not the other way around. They argued that their client had been forced to defend himself in a life-or-death situation. Multiple witnesses took the stand during the trial, including a cooperating witness named Vance Brockington. Brockington testified that K-Flock had allegedly retaliated on his behalf after he was shot by a rival gang member. He claimed the rapper had FaceTimed him from the hospital before carrying out a subsequent shooting. The presence of a cooperating witness, someone from the streets who is now working with the government, added another layer of intensity to the proceedings. For nearly 2 weeks, both sides presented their cases. The prosecution painted K-Flock as the leader of a violent street gang who used his rising fame to further criminal enterprises and terrorize communities. The defense argued he was a young artist being persecuted for his music who found himself in a tragic situation where he had no choice but to protect his own life. On March 18, 2025, closing arguments concluded. The fate of 21-year-old Kevin Perez was now in the hands of the jury. After 2 days of deliberations, the jury returned their verdict on March 20th, 2025. The courtroom fell silent as the clerk read out each count. Count 1, racketeering conspiracy, guilty. Count 3, use of a firearm resulting in death, guilty. Count 4, attempted murder and assault with a dangerous weapon in aid of racketeering, guilty. Count 5, use of a firearm for attempted murder and assault with a dangerous weapon, guilty. But then came count 2, the most serious charge of all, murder in aid of racketeering, specifically for the killing of Huáscar Hernandez. The jury had acquitted K-Flock on the murder charge. They believed his self-defense claim. A full conviction on all counts would have meant a mandatory life sentence, but by beating the top count, K-Flock had avoided that fate. Acting U.S. Attorney Matthew Podolsky released a statement following the verdict. Kevin Perez, aka K-Flock, was the leader of a neighborhood street gang known as Sevside, DOA, and with that gang, he committed a series of gang-motivated shootings. Perez, a drill rapper, instilled fear across the community with his violent actions, and then threatened rivals, bragged about shootings, and taunted victims in his rap lyrics. But as a unanimous jury has now found, Perez can no longer hide behind his music, and instead will be held to account for his violent crimes. The defense, while disappointed by the convictions on multiple counts, immediately recognized the significance of the murder acquittal. K-Flock's attorney stated, "It is however important to note that my Mr. Perez was acquitted of the most serious charge, murder in aid of racketeering, a charge that carried with it a mandatory life sentence. Throughout the past few weeks, we have witnessed my client's strength, resilience, and determination to fight for justice." 50 years, social media posts, and what comes next. Almost immediately after the verdict was read, K-Flock took to Instagram to share his thoughts, and what he posted would come back to haunt him. "I beat the top count. I made the judge cry. Kill all rats." That post, a reference to his murder acquittal and a clear shot at anyone who had cooperated with the government, spread like wildfire across social media. To his fans, it was a defiant statement of victory against a system that had tried to bury him. To prosecutors, it was something else entirely. But before we get to how the government responded to that post, we need to understand what K-Flock was still facing. Because even though he beat the murder charge, the convictions on the remaining counts carried serious consequences. Sentencing was initially scheduled for July 16th, 2025. Then it was pushed back to October 16th, 2025. And then, just weeks ago, K-Flock's attorney Michael T. Ashley requested another 60-day adjournment, explaining that the defense team hadn't been able to obtain certain materials needed for the sentencing submission. The judge granted the request, but made his position clear. The defense should expect no further adjournments. K-Flock's sentencing is now scheduled for December 16th, 2025, exactly 4 years to the day after the Hernandez shooting. And now we arrive at what may be the most devastating development in this entire saga. Federal prosecutors have submitted their sentencing recommendation to Judge Louis J. Lyman. Their request? 50 years in federal prison. Let that sink in for a moment. K-Flock is currently 21 years old. If the judge follows the prosecution's recommendation, he would be 71 years old before he would be eligible for release. The government's sentencing sentencing memo laid out in painstaking detail why they believe such a severe sentence is warranted. They accuse K-Flock of leading a violent street gang and using his influence to transform the neighborhood gang Sev Side into a highly visible, influential, and violent entity. The 50-year recommendation breaks down as follows: 20 years for each of the 2 racketeering and assault counts, plus 10 years for his firearms charge. But perhaps most damaging was how prosecutors used K-Flock's own post-trial Instagram post against him. They wrote that his "I beat the top count, I made the judge cry, kill all rats" post demonstrated a complete disregard for the law. In other words, even after being convicted on multiple serious federal charges, K-Flock was still using social media to celebrate and to threaten potential witnesses. The prosecution's memo painted a picture of a young man who, despite everything, had learned nothing, who showed no remorse, who continued to glorify the very behavior that had landed him in federal prison in the first place. And this brings us to the larger conversation that this case forces us to have, a conversation about social media, about drill music, and about how the words we put out into the world can be weaponized against us. K-Flock's case represents something unprecedented in the relationship between hip-hop and the criminal justice system. We've seen rap lyrics used in court before. We've seen prosecutors try to use an artist's music as evidence of criminal intent. But this case took it further than almost any before it. The government didn't just use K-Flock's lyrics, they used his Instagram captions, his hashtags, his selfie videos. They argued that his very success as an artist was part of a scheme to recruit people for fraud. They turned the tools of modern music promotion into the building blocks of a RICO case. And the implications of this extend far beyond K-Flock himself. Every young artist coming up in the drill scene, every rapper who incorporates street life into their music, has to now consider, could these words I'm writing end up in a courtroom? Could this caption I'm posting become evidence in a federal RICO case? There's a tendency when we talk about cases like this to make it purely about right and wrong, guilty and innocent. But the reality is far more complicated than that. K-Flock beat the murder charge. A jury of his peers looked at the evidence and determined that when he shot Huáscar Hernandez on that December morning in 2021, he was acting in self-defense. That's not nothing. That's a significant legal victory that potentially saved him from spending the rest of his natural life behind bars. But he's still facing up to 50 years for the charges he was convicted on. The attempted murder, the racketeering, the firearms offenses, these aren't minor charges. These are the kinds of charges that have destroyed the lives of countless young men from communities just like the Bronx. And there's the human tragedy at the center of all of this that we cannot forget. Huáscar Hernandez is dead. A 24-year-old man lost his life outside a barbershop on a Thursday morning. His family will never get him back. Whatever K-Flock's legal fate turns out to be, whatever the judge decides at sentencing on December 16th, nothing changes that fundamental fact. So where does this leave us? K-Flock sits in federal custody, waiting to learn how much of his life he's going to spend behind bars. His attorneys have vowed to appeal the portions of the verdict they believe are against the weight of the evidence. His fans continue to call for his freedom. His prosecutors want him locked away until he's an old man. According to recent reports, the sentencing is now set for December 16th, 2025, 4 years to the day after the shooting that started it all. He went from Billboard's Rookie of the Month to a federal racketeering conviction in a matter of months. He went from collaborating with Cardi B to facing half a century in prison. He beat the charge that could have put him away for life, and then immediately posted on Instagram in a way that prosecutors are now using to argue he deserves the maximum possible sentence. This is the reality of the music industry in 2025. This is what happens when the streets and the studio collide. This is what happens when social media becomes a crime scene. Stay locked in for updates on this case. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, what you post online lives forever. K-Flock's case isn't happening in a vacuum. Across the country, a wave of young rappers, particularly those associated with drill music, have found themselves entangled in federal RICO cases that use their lyrics, social media posts, and music videos as evidence against them. The pattern is undeniable, and the consequences are devastating. Perhaps the most high-profile comparison is Young Thug, whose YSL RICO case in Atlanta became the longest criminal trial in Georgia history. Prosecutors alleged that his record label, Young Stoner Life, was actually a criminal street gang responsible for murders, armed robberies, and drug trafficking. Just like K-Flock, Young Thug's lyrics were dissected in court, with prosecutors arguing that songs like Ski and Slatty contained admissions of real criminal activity. After spending over 2 years behind bars awaiting trial, Young Thug eventually accepted a plea deal in late 2024. Then there's the case of Tay K, the Texas rapper who was sentenced to 55 years in prison for his involvement in a home invasion robbery that resulted in a murder. He was just 16 years old when the crime occurred, and his song song The Race, which he recorded while on the run from authorities, went viral, accumulating hundreds of millions of streams. Prosecutors used the song's lyrics and music video as evidence of his lack of remorse. In New York specifically, the drill scene has been hit particularly hard. Chef G and Sleepy Hallow, two of Brooklyn drill's biggest names, were indicted on RICO charges in 2023, accused of leading the 8 Trey Crip gang and orchestrating multiple shootings. Their music videos were entered into evidence, with prosecutors claiming certain visuals depicted actual crime scenes and real firearms used in shootings. Chicago, where drill music originated, has seen similar targeting. FBG Duck was murdered in 2020, and the subsequent federal investigation led to RICO charges against members of the O-Block faction of the Black Disciples, the same gang associated with the late King Von. Prosecutors alleged the murder was retaliation for Duck's diss tracks targeting O-Block members. The common thread in all these cases is unmistakable. Federal prosecutors have identified drill music as a roadmap to criminal activity. They argue these aren't just songs, they're confessions set to a beat. Defense attorneys counter that this approach criminalizes artistic expression and disproportionately targets Black artists from impoverished communities. What makes K-Flock's situation particularly alarming is how prosecutors connected his Instagram engagement metrics to alleged fraud recruitment schemes. If that legal theory gains traction, every rapper with a growing following could theoretically be accused of building an audience for criminal purposes. The message from law enforcement is clear. In 2025, your bars can put you behind bars. And for a generation of artists who built their careers on authenticity and street credibility, that reality is forcing an impossible choice between artistic expression and personal freedom. Thanks for watching. Check out other cards on the screen.